The New York Attorney General filing suit moments ago against Donald Trump and his family for violating federal and state charities law. Let's get right to it. Jean Casares has been pouring through this. She's joining me right now. Jean, what are we learning so far?
Well, we have just gotten the actual complaint. It's 41 pages. It is the Attorney General of the state of New York and suing Donald J. Trump in an individual capacity, Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump and Eric Trump, as well as the Trump Foundation. And there are very serious allegations of violation, they say, of state law and federal charities law involving the Trump Foundation, commingling of funds. Let's look at some quotes from the complaint right now. It says, first of all, quote, "The petition filed today alleges a pattern of persistent illegal conduct occurring over more than a decade that includes extensive unlawful political coordination with the Trump presidential campaign, repeated and willful self-dealing transactions to benefit Mr. Trump's personal and business interests, and violations of basic legal obligations for nonprofit foundations." It goes on to say the Attorney General's investigation found that the Trump Foundation raised in excess of $2.8 million in a manner designed to influence the 2016 presidential election at the direction and under the control of senior leadership of the Trump presidential campaign. And what they are asking for in this is that they are asking for restitution of the $2.8 million. They're asking for more penalties beyond that. They're asking that the foundation be dissolved under a court of law, that Donald J. Trump is not allowed to have a charitable foundation for the next 10 years, for his 3 children that are named as defendants for fewer than that, 1 year each for them. And very serious allegations here. Illegal conduct, they are saying in this. And we have reached out to the White House, the Trump Foundation, his children here in New York, to get a response to all this.
It's all happening right now, so give them a moment to respond. We will wait and hear, because a response is going to be necessary either in public or in a court of law. Jean, thank you so much. Joining me right now to react to this is former federal prosecutor Shan Wu, CNN senior political analyst Mark Preston, and CNN legal and national security analyst, former FBI special agent Asha Rangappa. Shan, give me your take on this.
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between the civil and the criminal here. This is a civil complaint, and that may cause some more problems for the president than a criminal one. We can talk about that later. But there's precedent that he can't stop a civil case from going forward. That's the ghosts from the Clinton era coming back to haunt him. And on the criminal side, I think it's very troubling that they're talking about this collusion with the senior Trump executives with regard to campaign donations, because that could raise problems with campaign finance laws, and that has the potential for going criminal. So I think there are 2 tracks we're looking at now.
Mark, with the $2.8 million and what Jean very perfectly highlighted, they raised in excess of $2.8 million in a manner designed to influence the 2016 presidential election at the direction and under the control of senior leadership of the Trump presidential campaign. Does that get back to that Iowa fundraiser, or is there something else?
You know, I'm not sure, because we haven't heard the details on what that coordination could have been. Although, you know, I was at that Iowa fundraiser. I remember that was a night for our viewers. If they remember, Donald Trump refused to participate in a Fox News presidential debate in Iowa and instead held his own rally to say he was raising money for veterans organizations, and held a big rally across town. I remember being there. It was packed. Right. But, you know, you have to wonder, Kate, if that's what we're talking about here, because there was so much made about it, and there was so much made about how much money he was raising for those veterans organizations.
It's so true. Asha, I think what I was reading through the quick take from David Fahrenthold, which we give credit where credit is due. Much of this came out in David Farenthold's intrepid reporting at the Washington Post and what he uncovered. In David's piece in the Washington Post about this lawsuit, Barbara Underwood, it says that she said a 20-month state investigation is what was undertaken and what found all of this. What would go into this? What kind of concrete evidence are they looking for in order to come out with such a statement like this?
Well, this is the kind of case where you follow the money. When you have a charitable foundation, as the president does, you have IRS filings, you have state filings to show where the money is going. Remember that private foundations raise money mostly from private donors who are coming in, and they're told that your money is going to go to X, Y, or Z. If that money is instead funneled back around, their donations are funneled back around into your own businesses, then you start to violate the laws that are in place to prevent using charities for self-dealing. And New York has one. It's called the Nonprofit Revitalization Act of 2013, and it basically explicitly prevents using money for purposes that are in which you have a personal interest. So campaign expenditures, Trump properties, businesses, all of those things would definitely create conflicts under these kinds of laws.
And Shan, you were talking about the difference between a civil lawsuit and criminal here. You said this is civil. What's the difference? What does it mean for Donald Trump?
I think what it means for the president is there is precedent that says a sitting president cannot stop the progress of a civil case. That was the Paula Jones Supreme Court decision. So here, as we're seeing with some of these civil suits, he may have to do combat. He's got to litigate those. He may have to give depositions. His team is going to object to that. They may try to make an argument that the sheer volume of it means that it needs to go to the Supreme Court to be decided. Of course, that's rather illogical on its face, because it would indicate, if the Supreme Court sides with him, that the worse your conduct is, the more protection you deserve. But on the criminal side, if this turns into a criminal investigation of campaign finance violations, a sitting president probably does have the protection against being indicted or being, pulled into a grand jury, which gets us back into some of the questions being raised in the Russian probe. But those are the two differences.
That's pretty important differences and distinctions right now. Mark, I'm trying to remember back how Donald Trump and his family reacted when these reports were coming out kind of throughout the election and afterward. And I was just handed and reminded that at a press conference in May of 2016, Donald Trump, when asked about he said that he gave close to $6 million to a veterans group, and that comes from the charity we're discussing, the charitable event that we're discussing. When it came to folks questioning him, he said you should be ashamed of folks should be ashamed of themselves for asking questions about the money that he donated. And of course, then he went on to say, "I've never received such bad publicity for doing such a good job." Right. All of that is now coming back. I just want to highlight that because we have yet to hear from the president, yet to hear from anyone in the White House or counsel.
Well, and that's been his go-to, right? So it's a personal attack on me. This is being driven by Democratic interests. How dare you question me? Do as I say, not as I do. I mean, that has been his strategy, his defense strategy since he started running for president. Quite frankly, since he really popped onto the scene when you go back to the late 70s into the 80s and 90s. And what have you. What's interesting about this new filing that we're seeing today is this. This didn't just pop up. As you noted, this investigation has been going on for 20 months. Just because the former Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, who was forced out of office to resign over allegations of abuse, and we have this new Attorney General who's just got in there, doesn't mean that she decided to drop this today. This office has been looking into this for well over a year, as well as many other situations with the Trump situation. So we should not be surprised that this would have dropped today.
Asha, what happens now? What questions do you have?
My question now is, how does this relate to just the bigger pattern that we're seeing on a number of different fronts? Shan mentioned the campaign finance issues. We see that is an issue that's popping up also in the Stormy Daniels lawsuit. The self-dealing. There's a separate lawsuit that's suing the president for violating the emoluments clause of the Constitution, which is about using his Trump properties to raise money for himself. So this is not a one-off. And to the point just made, I think that one thing to learn from this is that when you have investigations, they take on a life of their own. And just because a prosecutor leaves doesn't mean the investigation gets dropped. You have Barbara Underwood come in. This is an ongoing investigation. And I think this is a lesson to be taken when looking at the Russia probe also, that removing people doesn't necessarily stop the investigation.
Yeah, important news on its face of this lawsuit now being filed, and there might be a lot of messages and lessons to be learned even beyond this. Much more to come. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.